We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Leyko, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Hey everyone, welcome back to Paring Down. My name is Shannon Leyko, and I love being here with you every single week. Today we're going to talk through 5 psychological phenomena that really affect our overconsumption as well as our decluttering. I have a background in psychology, just that was my major. I have a degree in it in undergrad. I went to Christopher Newport University. Shout out to the captains out there. And my minor was communications, which will probably not surprise anybody. But anyways, I didn't go any further with my psychology degree to get my master's or doctorate. Maybe someday. Life is not over yet. So I am basically as qualified as anybody else on the street. However, my love for psychology remains, as well as obviously lots of things I learned in that 4-year education. And so that shows up often in what I share on Instagram and here on the podcast. I just think it's really fascinating to learn how our brains work and why we make the decisions we do. And we're talking about an intentional life here. That's a lot about our decisions. So I think it's fascinating to know what's going on cognitively that affects those decisions that we're making. And I want to share some of the most interesting information I have found with all of you guys. Once we are aware of maybe what psychological phenomena are affecting why we're not decluttering or why it's hard for us to declutter or why we're buying too much stuff, then we can take back our agency. But it's important to be able to recognize it, to put a name to it and to see what is happening so that we can, have a fighting chance. I can do another episode about a bunch of cognitive biases that affect our decluttering and overconsumption. I will be talking about a couple of cognitive biases today. I'm also going to be talking through some psychological theories. So today is like a little mix of both. But if you guys are like, I enjoy this episode, please let me know. And I'm happy to do another episode or start a series where we talk through different cognitive biases that might be affecting us so that we can stay aware of what's going on in our little brain, even when we're not so aware of it. But for today, I have chosen 5 that I think are super interesting to start with. And we're going to start with a multidisciplinary theory or concept. It's not a cognitive bias, but it's just the attention economy. So if you've heard of the attention economy, then you probably know the basics here, which is that it draws from economics, from psychology, neuroscience, even technology and media studies in order to kind of explain why we are being used, in a sense, exploited in order for companies to make money. Now, I am not attacking anyone here. That's not my intent. It's just so we can be aware that in this digital age, our attention is a limited, right? We don't have all the attention in the world to give, and a very valuable resource. So it is treated as a commodity in today's digital age. And this very deeply relates to consumption and feeds our overconsumption. So basically our attention, the reason it's part of an economy is that it can be monetized. So the longer you give your attention to something, the more advertisements they can expose you to. So therefore, attention equals money. This is why there's so much money invested into figuring out how to keep us on our phones. It's so the longer we're on them, the more opportunity there is for these companies to make money through sales and partnerships. So personalized recommendations, right? Where you're like, did my phone read my mind? Push notifications, things that add to the infinite scroll. So even techniques like gamification that keep us wanting to get that dopamine hit of a reward. I mean, liking someone's post, that those likes are a gamification that tell us oh, are you interesting? That kind of thing. And that keeps us coming back for more. We want to see more. All of that is employed to keep users engaged. And I think we all can recognize that, right? We're like, I'm on my phone. And once we get out of the hole, like something, pulls us out of that dark Instagram scroll that we've been on without meaning to be there, we're like, oh, like I was just watching one video about how to cook this meal for my family. And the next thing I know, I am watching a raccoon pet and falling in love with this raccoon that lives inside this person's house. And how did I get here 45 minutes later? You know what I mean? And we know that it starts with the things we're interested in, and then they find a way to keep us infinitely scrolling. And what you don't necessarily recognize during that is how many ads you are seeing. And maybe you do recognize it, but a lot of times we might scroll past ads quickly, or we don't click on it. And so we think, whatever, it is what it is. But realistically, that is making social media owners, if you will, I don't even know what to call them, very rich. Okay. And it's also obviously benefiting the companies that are selling on the social media platforms. And this can all be applied outside of social media. I just think the digital age makes it even more intense. I mean, the 24-hour news cycle does this as well. They make sure that they have alarming news that captures our attention, because psychologically we are more apt to be interested in novel or news that scares us, because from like a historical context, it was more important for us to be aware of the things that could put us in danger, right? That helped us stay alive. And that is still within all of us little human beings, even though for the most part in Western society in the United States, generally speaking, of course, this is general, we're safe, but the news cycle has been adapted very purposefully to be a negative news cycle. And then now they have it running for 24 hours. Why is that? Is it because they really care that we know all of the information that's going on in the country, or that they really think we should know every last terrible story that is out there? No, it's to keep us tuned in so that they can play more ads, so that their channel, so that their streaming network or whatever it is makes more money, right? Or people will pay more money for them to advertise. I mean, there's just so many things that go into it that I'm not even able to cover right now, because I'm not an expert in this, but I think we can all see, no matter what kind of digital information we're consuming, the attention economy is built so that our attention is a moneymaker. So we really need to be aware of that, right? Like the more I'm on my phone, the more I'm watching a screen. Not only is that keeping me from getting out in the world and maybe connecting in ways that is more beneficial for us in so many ways, be it relationally or physically or whatever, it is also part of our overconsumption problems. It's the reason we have so much stuff in our house that we don't need, is because even if it's only once a month, that we somehow, avoid all of those personalized ads that tell us about things that we are definitely going to be interested in. And maybe you're really good and have good self-control, but you're still going to be buying something. Maybe it's once a month, once a year, or once a week, every day. I don't know your life, but we're going to be buying more than we need, because suddenly we're going to be told we have all these needs we didn't know were needs to begin with, because we were exposed to them on digital platforms. So ultimately, it's adding to this overconsumption and clutter in our house. Okay, the second phenomenon is a cognitive bias called loss aversion. And this more closely relates to decluttering than consumption, but it can relate to both. So basically, it is a concept from behavioral economists and psychology, and it describes how people tend to prefer avoiding a loss over acquiring the equivalent gain. So basically, the pain of losing something feels way more intense than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. A great example that is often used is when you lose $100, it feels worse than the joy experienced from when you gain $100. So do you feel joy gaining $100? Absolutely. If I found a $100 bill on the sidewalk and I didn't see anyone else around that it could have dropped from, that I could go give it back to, like that'll be pretty sweet. You know what I mean? But if I lose a $100 bill, I would lose my mind, right? Like it's just way worse, even though those equal the same amount. And so that is what loss aversion is talking about. And what does this mean for our decision making and our behavior? Well, basically, people are more likely to take risks that avoid loss than they are to take a risk that would mean they would achieve gains. I mean, this is basically why so many people don't go after their dreams even, right? They're like, I would be so afraid of failure. This is a fear of failure right here, that I'm not even going to go pursue this thing I'm interested in to achieve that potential gain because I'm more afraid of the potential loss. Now, when it comes to decluttering, we know that, logically, we know we're gaining the freedom of a clean house, we're getting more time, all of these gains. But what we're risking is our happiness. We're asking, will decluttering make me happier? Or will it make my life worse because I'm going to regret what I'm getting rid of? So the risk at stake is our happiness and well being. And we are more likely to say, I would rather hold on to all this stuff because I'm afraid of losing my happiness and well being, even if I can see that I might achieve gains that are higher or at least equivalent if I were to declutter my stuff. And what goes along with this is that people often prefer guaranteed smaller gains over risky larger ones, even if the risk is favorable. So you might look around your house and know that if you did one fell swoop of like decluttering your basement, that you don't have much in there that you really would want to keep anyway, and getting rid of it all would give you this amazing space back. Your mental clarity would be better. Your guilt would be gone. Like all of these tremendous gains. That is a risky, larger gain that is very favorable versus a guaranteed smaller gain, which would be, I'm only going to declutter like this one little area right now, or just the trash. I'm just going to get rid of trash, And in a sense, I think we can use this to our advantage. So maybe because it's easier for us cognitively to make smaller, easier, less risky steps in the right direction, do that, because at least it's forward movement. So if you're seeing decluttering as like this big overhaul of your home, that risk is too high. Cognitively, you're not going to want to do that because of loss aversion. So go ahead and do those smaller gains that aren't as risky, guaranteed smaller gains. Get rid of all the trash in your house, things that you're not sentimentally attached to. Just go through the things that aren't hard to start with. Even if a bigger swoop would make your house feel better and you'd probably land in your favor and you'd be glad you did it, if you're not starting at all because your cognitive fear, like loss aversion, is stopping you, then you might as well take those baby steps to start moving in the right direction. And that's what I would encourage you to do. And this bias makes a lot of sense because in survival terms, avoiding losses, like our resources for survival or safety, was often far more critical than pursuing gains. We did have to like pursue a food source and that sort of thing, but ultimately it was a lot safer to stay where you were than it was to venture out to discover something new. And so that is hardwired within us when you look back over human history. Okay, the third psychological phenomenon is the endowment effect. This is another cognitive bias. It's very closely attached to loss aversion, and it describes how people value an item they own far more than the same item if they didn't own it. I mean, we see this all the time on Facebook Marketplace when people are trying to sell things at a higher price than we are willing to pay for it, right? That's the endowment effect. So a person might be unwilling to sell their coffee mug for less than $10, even though most of us wouldn't pay more than like $3 to own the same mug, especially if it's already been used before and it's not on like a pretty Target shelf. You know what I mean? And so ownership creates this emotional or sentimental attachment to items, which then further increases our perceived value of them. So not only do we see the value that we paid for it, and we're like, that's what I should be getting in return because it's like new. It doesn't look any different than the day that I bought it. But then on top of that, we're adding our emotional or sentimental attachment to it. And so then we really go through the roof in terms of this loss aversion for that item, which leads to the endowment effect, that we value it more because we own it. We see this even with real estate. Homeowners often overvalue their homes compared to market value because of personal memories attached or the amount of work that they put into it. And it takes real estate agents having like hard conversations with them. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I love some trashy television and I love watching Selling Sunset. And there's the classic example of the guy on there that was trying to sell his house for $75 million. And the real estate agents were like, bruh, that thing, when you look at what it's actually worth and what someone's going to pay for it, is more like $35 or $40 million. It was something like that. But he was off by like $30 million. You know what I mean? Because of his hard work and the different finishes he put into it and all of that, because of the ownership, because of the endowment effect, when in reality, it didn't have the same value realistically as he thought it did in his head. We also see this tactic used when it comes to how people are selling us things. A great example is anything with a free trial or test drives for cars. So car dealerships capitalize on the endowment effect by creating a sense of ownership before the purchase decision is made. They say, take the car on a test drive. Yeah, drive it around, see how it feels. And we're like, are you sure? Right? But then we're driving it. And then we really start feeling like, oh, this is me. This could be mine, and you're enjoying it. You're looking at the different features. And because you are driving it and you're in control of that car, it feels like it's yours. And therefore, it is much harder to then get back to that, to the dealership and say, no, I'm not going to get it. Because you already test drove it. You already got that little taste of ownership, that endowment effect that will then make you want to buy the car. This is exactly why we're given free trials of things as well, because it's a lot harder to lose something. Again, back to the loss aversion. Let's say someone sends you this skin mask. I mean, I don't use skin masks, so it's a weird example for me to bring up, but whatever. They give you a free sample of the skin mask. You put it on. You love it. It makes you feel relaxed. You feel like your skin is glowing afterwards. It's amazing, right? So you continue to buy it because you don't want to lose that feeling. But you didn't even know that feeling existed until they gave you that free sample, okay? So with anything, you have to be very mindful. That is why they're giving out free samples at Costco or wherever you shop. So I hear. You guys, I've never been inside a Costco. Can you believe it? Or I don't think I've been inside any big warehouse store. I mean, I think I vaguely remember in high school going to a Sam's Club with my friend and her mom. But I mean, I've never, but I hear they give out a lot of yummy samples of things. And they do that obviously to make you want to buy it. But why does that make you want to buy it? Because you've already tried it and you know it's good. And then you feel attached to it. I don't know. Maybe hot dogs doesn't have the endowment effect. You don't feel like you own a hot dog. Anyways, I'm getting off topic here, but the endowment effect is that you have this identity and ownership attached with something, which makes it harder for you to let it go, right? That makes it harder when it comes to decluttering. And also, like I said, there's these tactics that they do use this to make it more inviting for you to overconsume. It's both sides of the equation. So how do we mitigate the endowment effect? So there's two big things here. One is just a perspective shift, right? This is why I'm sharing these different theories and biases with you, is so you can just be aware of it. So try to view owned items more objectively, as if they belong to someone else. That's a very powerful way of viewing your items. If this belonged to someone else, how would I feel about it? And then the next one is a more practical piece of advice, but really lean into market comparisons. So compare the actual market value of an item before you decide whether or not it's worth keeping. So if you have whatever in your storage unit because you think you need to sell it someday, really go out there and see how much people are paying for it. And does that make up for whatever you're spending on a storage unit? Or is that really worth holding it in your basement or, whatever it might be? Really be aware of how this endowment effect could be affecting not only the clutter in your home, but even financial decisions. Hey guys, it's time for your ad break. Each week I like to say a huge thank you for your graciousness that these are part of the podcast. Here we go. I was talking to my girlfriend recently who has been struggling with some health issues, including infertility, and her doctor told her that her ovaries had been damaged. It wasn't a genetic problem, but likely exposure to toxins. And we know that we have these PFAs everywhere now, from the air we breathe, to the clothes we wear, to the water we drink. And I don't say this to fearmonger. I just want to share with you something that has eased my mind when it comes to what me and my children are drinking, and that is our AquaTrue. More than ever, it is so important to have really pure filtered water in your home. And AquaTrue is a reverse osmosis water filtration system that not only takes care of PFAs, but any other contaminants in our water, which are found so commonly in tap water, as well as in typical pitcher filtration systems that don't have as advanced of technology. Their countertop purifiers work with no installation or plumbing unless you want one of the bigger purification systems that go underneath your sink. They have that too. We use it for our dog's water because our dogs are bougie and deserve the best. My husband uses it in his coffee, tea, cooking. I mean, we use this for everything to maintain our health. I think we forget how often we drink water in different things that we consume, like soups and, stocks, all of that. So this is a really, really valuable product for your health. AquaTrue comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee and even makes a fantastic gift. I've told you this before, but we got one for my in-laws for Christmas. So today, my lucky listeners, you receive 20% off any AquaTrue purifier. Just go to aquatrue.com. That's AQUATRU. So it's AquaTrue, but without the E at the end. aquatrue.com and enter the code pairing. Remember, there's no I in pair. It's PARING at checkout. That's 20% off any AquaTrue water purifier when you go to aquatrue.com and use promo code PARING. Number 4 we're going to talk about is the sunk cost fallacy. Obviously, this is a cognitive bias that is pretty well known. And this is where people continue to invest time, money, effort, whatever it might be, an investment into a decision or a project simply because they've already invested so much into it already. So even when it doesn't make any rational sense for them to continue investing their time, money, effort, they continue to do so because they already have. So this stems from this difficulty of letting go of past investments because we don't want to feel like we made a bad choice, that we wasted all that time or money or effort, right? And so those are considered sunk costs because they cannot be recovered. And that is a big old bummer that we want to avoid. So keep holding on to it in hopes that someday we're going to actually need it or it's going to be a good investment. And then we can say, good job, pat myself on the back. I'm so glad I held on to it. And it's not a sunk cost. But the reality is, the majority of the time, it is a sunk cost and we're just sinking more and more and more into it. And this sunk cost fallacy is why so many people base their decisions on past investments rather than future outcomes. And what matters more? The future outcomes. That's what life is. I mean, the past is great. We love the past. It teaches us. But realistically, life is what's happening now and in the future. So future outcomes really make more sense for us to base our decisions on. And yet it's very hard for us to do that because of the sunk cost fallacy, because we value our time and money and effort. So an example of a sunk cost fallacy that isn't as obvious as, investing your money in something and hoping that eventually it'll pay off. But maybe you're continuing to watch a boring movie or read a book that you don't like because you've already paid for the ticket at the movie theater or because you've already started the book and you don't want to waste whatever 45 minutes you've already spent on it. You know what I mean? So you just keep going. That's the sunk cost fallacy. There's this emotional attachment, the desire to avoid regret or to admit failure. That's what drives the sunk cost fallacy. So you might be staying in an unhealthy relationship because of the time and energy that you've already invested. There's also this escalation of commitment. So not only are you basing it on the past, but it becomes more dire the longer you're in it. So the sunk cost fallacy builds on itself. It's like this snowball of saying, I've got to keep doing this. So individuals or organizations might double down on failing endeavors. And to the outside world, people are like, huh? Why would they double down on that? Clearly it's failing. They need to do something different. But they do that to justify earlier investments. And then what does it do? It leads to even greater losses. When it comes to decluttering and the sunk cost fallacy, we think, I've held on to it for this many years. How many of us have done this? I've held on to this for so many years thinking I might need it. I bet if I get rid of it today, I'm going to need it tomorrow. That's what we all think because that sometimes is how life works, right? You can not think about something or not need something and the second you get rid of it, you need it. It's just so silly. But this keeps us holding on to things longer just in case, thinking tomorrow is the day. Tomorrow is the day that I am going to need a different picture frame than the ones that are already hanging in my house. And so I'm going to hold on to all these extra picture frames in the garage. You know what I mean? And you've invested your time and your space, maybe even your money if you have a storage unit, into these items. And so we don't want to think of that time and space as a sunk cost or a bad investment. We want to think, I'm going to hold on to this until it's worth it, until I'm so glad I did. And then you also, of course, have the money piece of it, holding on to an item that you spent money on just because you invested that money, not because of the future outcome that you're actually going to use it or it's actually going to bring you joy. You're making your decision to hold on to it because of the past money that you invested into it. So, what is like a big reframe here? The biggest one is to ask yourself this question: would I still make the same decision today? Just like when it comes to the endowment effect, you might ask yourself, what would I think of this item? What value would I place on this item if it belonged to someone else, not to me? This is a big question to ask yourself here for the sunk cost fallacy. Would I still buy this today? Would I make the same decision today? Maybe it's not about buying, it's about decluttering, it's about a relationship, it's about anything that could be a sunk cost fallacy. But think, would I still make the same decision today? And let that be an indicator of whether or not it's time to let something go. Okie dokie. Number 5 is the optimal stimulation model. This is not a cognitive bias. It's a psychological theory that explains how individuals seek a balance in our stimulation levels in order to maintain a sense of comfort and satisfaction. So basically, we adjust our behavior to reach the ideal stimulation for our brains and our bodies. And we adjust our behaviors to either increase or decrease our stimulation to meet this very personal equilibrium, because we all have different thresholds of where our optimal stimulation lies. So whether we're seeking novelty or trying to maintain routines or avoiding change, all of that is threaded back into this idea of the optimal stimulation model. We are trying to reach the level of stimulation that feels right for our brains and our bodies. If we're understimulated, we pursue behaviors that excite us. We want that novel feeling. If we're overstimulated, we withdraw and we simplify, right? Now, most of us think that we are very overstimulated, which is true in some regards, which is why we talk about simplifying life and getting off of our screens and that kind of thing. However, what's interesting, and I read about this in Michael Easter's book, the Scarcity Brain, we are very much understimulated when it comes to our hardwired needs for things like food, provisions, belongings that actually help keep us alive, social connections, right? These hardwired human needs. We're actually understimulated. So we, for instance, get food at the store or delivered straight to us. So we're understimulated when it comes to the hunting or gathering. We can just order anything we want off of Amazon. Therefore, we are understimulated in creating or resourcing. And we're lacking face-to-face interaction more than ever. So we're actually understimulated in true human connection. So what do we do? Because we're understimulated in those things, we turn to highly stimulating, highly repeatable, which means often artificial behaviors that attempt to satiate those hardwired desires for more of those innate needs. And again, this comes from Michael Easter's book, it's called Scarcity Brain. And he talks about this highly stimulating, highly repeatable behavior, which is kind of that addiction to the screens, or it makes us overconsume on Amazon, or we're eating, snack food out of the bag, one chip at a time, over and over again. Highly stimulating for our taste buds, highly repeatable. So to get provisions are highly stimulating, highly repeatable behavior. To make up for the understimulation is clickable shopping. For human interaction, it's amusing reels, right? We're understimulated with human interaction, so we seek to stimulate more through amusing reels. And what does that feed? The attention economy, right? They all kind of go back together. A non-decluttering or consumption topic example is food, kind of like I mentioned. We're understimulated in getting our food, and so we overstimulate through mindless eating. So this does relate to consumption big time because that novelty boosts our stimulation. So we're bored, we go and we shop. We don't have to work hard to get something. So we just continue to easily click it and shop over and over and over and over again, versus somebody who, if you make your own coffee mug, coffee mugs are on my mind because I had a reel go viral recently about how we all have way too many coffee mugs. And anywho, but let's say you're a potter, not Harry Potter, but like you're a a clay artist. I know nothing about fine arts. Oh my gosh. But anyways, so you make your own coffee mug, right? You are far less likely to feel like you need more coffee mugs. You made this one, you love it. Maybe you make two. I don't know your life. You're a coffee making machine, coffee mug making machine. But you don't need to continuously get the hit. You're very satisfied. There's much more long-term satisfaction when we kind of like take the slow route and we create something ourselves. But because we are understimulated in creation, we're not spending all that time making stuff. It frees up a lot more time to buy stuff. And that all it's all kind of wrapped up in the optimal stimulation model because we are understimulated and we then overstimulate ourselves in the form of overshopping. And this overstimulation, because of our understimulated environment, can go beyond just the moment of consumption. But for some, owning more items can create a stimulating environment, right? We know that clutter stimulates our brains. And for some people, rather than that being a source of stress, or maybe it is a source of stress and they don't even realize it based on that UCLA study where our cortisol levels do rise. But we don't know if it's caused by the clutter or people who already have higher cortisol are more likely to have clutter. It's important to recognize when we're talking about psychology, the difference between correlation and causation. So be mindful when you are reading things on social media, especially if it's not coming from somebody who actually has a background in science or, might be just be regurgitating information, to be aware that if you're reading something as a cause and effect, it's important to go back to those studies and see it might just be a correlation, because at least from what I've been able to do in my own research, there hasn't been a direct causation related between clutter and stress. There's just a correlation. And so what that tells us is that, yes, you have a higher cortisol or the stress hormone in your body when there's clutter around, but we don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. Yes, the more clutter, the more stress, but it could be the more stress, the more clutter. They're just correlated. We don't know the causation effect between the two. I hope that makes sense. But that being said, sometimes more items in the house might offer a feeling of abundance or control, especially for those who maybe didn't grow up with a whole lot. So some people seek more stimulation that is optimal for their level. And so the idea of not being as stimulated in their house feels scary for them. So it's kind of complicated, but it definitely is something to consider, because this is the optimal stimulation model is not one size fits all. And so how we interact with our belongings and what level of stimulation feels right for us can actually totally be affecting why you might be somebody who holds on to clutter and it's harder for you to get rid of than somebody else. Another piece to decluttering here is that it involves decisions and changes that might increase stress or uncertainty. So you're actually getting overstimulated with stress and uncertainty, and that pushes our stimulation levels out of the optimal range. So we withdraw and avoid because we don't want to deal with the stimulation that comes with those fears and the stress and the uncertainty of letting things go. So when you are decluttering or you're mindlessly shopping, try and ask yourself, take a deep breath. Am I overstimulated or am I understimulated? Am I bored and understimulated? And that is why I am making this choice. Am I seeking something novel because I'm understimulated? Or on the flip side, am I overstimulated right now? Am I stressed about decluttering? And that's why I'm holding on to things. It's because my body is not regulated. And you can, then practice some techniques to regulate your body to get back into a state, that optimal stimulation, where then you'll be able to declutter more successfully. All right, I'm going to throw in a bonus one here at the end just because it's really interesting to me, but it's not entirely a cognitive bias on its own. It's more of it's straightforward. It's more of just a phenomenon, and it's really interesting to me, and it's called the Diderot effect. Basically, this describes that when we acquire one new item, it often leads to a chain reaction of additional purchases that align with that original item. For example, you buy, I don't know, an iPad, and then you need an iPad cover, and you need a charger, and you want a stand, and you want something to hang it in in the car for the kids or whatever it might be. It comes with a bunch of accessories. The Diderot effect is really about accessories. Or you get this really cute shirt and then you're like, gosh, I don't really have a pair of pants that look good with this. So you get a pair of pants and then you're like, oh, I want to create the whole look. I'm going to get shoes and earrings, right? So your first purchase then leads to the next purchase, the next purchase, the next purchase. This is the Diderot effect. It's actually named after a French philosopher, Denis Diderot. And he described this phenomenon in an essay called Regrets on Parting with My Old Dressing Gown. And basically, after receiving a luxurious new dressing gown, Diderot noticed that his other possessions suddenly felt outdated and unworthy by comparison. So it prompted him to replace them to match the aesthetic and quality of the gown. So it's not just accessories, it's also plays into this idea of like keeping up with the next thing where you're like, oh, I got this nicer X, Y, and Z. Now I want this nicer X, Y, and Z to go with it. And it is a spiral of consumption. So just be aware of that one too, that little bonus Diderot effect there. I hope that you found all of this information as interesting as I do. Again, I'm just kind of sharing what I've learned through many books and years of studying in undergrad and just reading online. I wish I could tell you where I first heard every single one of these phenomenons or cognitive biases so I could link them here. But the big one that comes to mind is the optimal stimulation model, being from Michael Easter's book, Scarcity Brain. But I will link some other books that are psychology based and have to do with intentional living or living with less that you might find super interesting. And you'll probably see some of these terms pop up in there, along with a lot of others, which, like I said, I'm happy to do another episode that walks through some of these cognitive biases and psychological theories that relate to decluttering and consumption, if they are something that motivate you and are interesting for you to know, so that we can just stay aware, so we can make intentional choices. You can't make an intentional choice if you don't know what's going on, if you don't know what your choices are, you know? And so we have to recognize that sometimes there are things working against us. And I want to finish out just by saying, again, a big thank you. If I'm going to be really honest with you guys here at the end of the episode, it has been a hard week for me. I have very thin skin, which I've shared with you here on the podcast before. And I don't do the podcast or my Instagram, my newsletter, or whatever. I have lots of different resources. I don't do it for money. I don't get much money because I don't have a business mindset, because I don't, frankly, want that to be my motivation. And therefore, though, there's a slightly easier threshold for me to want to throw my hands in the air and say, why am I doing this? You know, like it's not like I'm motivated by money, which is a very, very privileged thing to say, but I do have a job besides this. And so it's easier for me to be like, well, it wouldn't affect my life that much if I stopped. And when people are mean to me, it makes me want to stop. And it makes me question if I'm being helpful, and maybe my style of speaking or the way I share isn't as mindful as I hope that it is, or my personality is just annoying, or, you know, it's really hard not to go there sometimes. I'm just being really honest with you guys. And there have been some things that have happened in the last week or two that have made me wonder if continuing to put out this podcast is as beneficial as I hope that it is, because that's the only reason I'm doing it. I think it's really fun. Yeah, I mean, I do it because it is a fun creative outlet for me, but I just genuinely love the idea of hopefully helping people live more intentional lives. I'm just really passionate about that. But yeah, it's hard when I see those negative things. And maybe I shouldn't care so much, but like I said, I am a sensitive Sally. I can't help it. It's the way God made me. And I want to say thank you, though, because I've had a few of you reach out and say how much you appreciate what I'm putting into the world. I've had way, 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 way more people offer me grace and love than any negativity. But as human beings, it's a cognitive bias. I'm sure I could look up somewhere that it's easier to focus on the negative, you know? So thank you to those of you who have been really kind, who have left really positive reviews. I think it's more natural for us to leave a negative review. I mean, we see that on Yelp. I don't believe Yelp reviews, because like the only people going on Yelp are those that are angry. Those who had a wonderful time very rarely, or even just like a pretty good time, will very rarely go and leave a review. It's when they want to vent about something that they go leave a bad one. And so it starts to skew things and it's not even true. And I've had a couple people remind me that the feedback I hear will often be negative because those are the people who want to give feedback. But I am blessed by so many of you who do give me really positive and encouraging feedback. And so I just wanted to say thank you. I'm sorry, it's a long way of saying thank you, but I wanted to offer honesty and vulnerability within that thank you and why it means so much to me when you do leave a positive review, because I recognize that you're taking time out of your day to do so. And also because it really helps combat that negativity that is really painful for me and can make me question, is this worth doing it? But then when I hear from the positive people, I know it's worth doing. And I am just grateful that you're here and that you're listening and that you're kind, wonderful humans, which I know is the vast majority of you, even those of you who have not left reviews or DM'd me. So anywho, that's that. I'm going to end with that. Hope that wasn't too much of a downer. I hope you know that I'm grateful for you. And I know that you're a good person listening out there. So thank you for being here. Love you long time. And I will see you next week. You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Leyko. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face. So thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at paring_down, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.